Okay, hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Dan Doggett from the Maryland Statewide IT Initiative, and today we're going to be talking about the built-in accessibility features in the latest iOS update. That's iOS 26. My goal today is to break down what these tools are and how they work and who they can help. Um, my name is Dan Doggett, as I was saying, and we're going to get started, just starting with a couple of housekeeping items. So before we dive in, I want to note that we do have live captioning available for today's session. You can enable them via the Zoom meeting controls toolbar. Also, today's webinar is being recorded and will be posted to our YouTube channel for future reference. We'll send out an email to all registrants with both the link and the slide deck once we have them up and available. And lastly, please feel free to add your comments or questions to the chat or the Q&A. I'm going to do my best to sort of talk through things and answer questions as we go, but there should also be some time at the end if folks have some questions. Okay, we're going to get started with a quick poll to gauge your experience using iOS accessibility features. So I'm going to send this out right now and just take a minute or two to answer the poll questions so that we can, gauge where everyone's at and go through those results together. So launching the poll right now. And then I will also just put the poll question in the chat as well, if that will be easier for folks to answer there. All right, thanks for those of you who have completed the poll. Let's give it just one more minute as folks are coming in. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. We've got, great. So let's end the poll and let's go through the answers. So it looks like 29% of you are not familiar at all with the iOS accessibility features, whereas 71% of you are somewhat familiar. Okay, great. Thank you for letting us know. That's very helpful. Okay, so before we dive into the specific features in this iOS update, it's helpful to understand how Apple builds them and what it is we're talking about. So when we're talking about the features in the operating system or the iOS, these are not separate apps you have to buy or download from the App Store. These are features that are directly built into like your iPhone or your iPad as soon as you get it. So finding these features on, say, your iPhone is pretty straightforward. On your iPhone, you can open your settings and scroll down, and you'll find accessibility directly under General. So everything that we're going to be discussing today is located right inside that section, and it's organized based on different access categories like vision or speech. So we're going to start today with the newest or most recent features added for iOS 26. So many of these tools now use Apple Intelligence, which is Apple's personal AI system, to help make the phone a little bit more adaptive. Okay, so the first major update is to voice control. If you don't know, voice control is a tool that allows a person to navigate or interact with their iPhone just using spoken commands. So previously, you had to be very strict about exact menu names or button labels to control your phone with your voice. Now you can use casual language. So you can just say, you could say what you see on the screen just by telling the phone to tap on a specific color folder or zoom on a certain section of text, and it will be able to locate those things for you. Okay, so moving on, for users with vision loss, VoiceOver now has a feature called Image Explorer. So we talked, a little bit about this in the video, where you can point your camera at an object or a document and get a description of it. So after that initial description, you can ask follow-up questions or get specific details about what it is exactly in front of you. This is a great tool for things like reading menus in restaurants, or checking receipts, or reading nutrition labels, looking at money, things like that could be very helpful in this respect. So another feature that has been updated, well, actually included here for the first time, is the accessibility reader. So Accessibility Reader has been something that's been built into the Safari browser and then other browsers as well for some time. But now this is built into the iOS system. So what it will do is it'll take highly complex layouts like multi-column articles, tables, or research papers, and it flattens it out into readable text. It strips away the clutter and helps you, read the text in a sort of a clean, high contrast view. So as I said before, this feature has been available in Safari, but now you can use it for files that you've downloaded to your phone. So an example of this is on the screen here. So we've got two iPhones, one that has an example, just like a small text version of the Odyssey. It's probably a PDF of a passage. And the text is super small and very hard to read, and would be pretty difficult for most people to navigate. Then on the right is the accessibility reader version. So here the contrast has been inverted. So the background is black and the text is white, which makes it easier to read. The text is also larger and easier, easier to manage font as well. So all of these are customizable settings that you can, use when you're using the accessibility reader. And so there's also a new integration for alternative drive systems for like power wheelchairs. So now iOS connects with hardware systems from companies like Tolt or Lucy, and this allows users to handle tracking and navigation through their devices without having to sort of recalibrate them every time they connect. And for our accessible gamers, iOS now natively supports the Sony Access controller. So Sony Access controller, for those of you that don't know, is a controller used specifically for assistive gaming. And now you can completely remap the buttons and combine like multiple controllers depending on what your physical setup is. So that's something that is new and exciting for the gaming community as well. Okay, so this next one, this is a little interesting. So we'll talk a little bit more about name recognition a little bit later, but it's a helpful feature for those who are deaf or hard of hearing, or maybe have a hard time processing sounds. So it's what it will do is if your name, like so, if you input your name, and if someone calls your name in a noisy room, like waiting for your drink to be ready at a coffee shop or when your table is ready at a restaurant, this tool will provide sort of a vibrating alert or a visual flash on your screen when it hears your name. So that way you don't always have to rely on those auditory cues for those types of things. This feature is this is not in itself a new feature. It's more of an update. In the older iPhone tool, there were already things that listened for, say, crying babies or smoke alarms or doorbells. But this one updates it specifically for your name. It also updates it to feature over 50 languages. So, like I said, it's great for people who wear heavy noise canceling headphones and just, want to know when someone's getting their attention. And then what's important about this is Apple does state that you should not rely on it for, safety or an emergency situation. So strictly for coffee, things like that. Okay, next, Apple has made a change to FaceTime that allows people to use sign language. So most people are probably familiar with FaceTime. It's the way to do video chatting on iOS devices. So this tool now, this update allows developers to sort of get a back end access for FaceTime. So it allows their own ASL translation apps to link directly with it. So in the past, if a deaf person wanted a live sign language interpreter for a call, they would have to flip back and forth between different apps, and it would just be a little bit messy. So now an interpreter can jump right on a normal FaceTime call, and it's great because FaceTime is already pretty popular with the deaf community. So this update just makes things a whole lot easier. Okay, so those are the new features for iOS 26. I noticed that we had some familiarity with the tools in iOS. We're going to sort of go through the different sort of features that are, not new, but are supported with iOS. So let's start with tools designed for like vision needs. So the first tool we have here is VoiceOver, which is Apple's native screen reader. So if you're not familiar with screen readers, they will read all the text, the contents of the screen aloud to you. So it's a great. These are pretty standard tools for the blind and low vision community. So VoiceOver is the one that is native to Apple products, and so you don't have to download it. It's already available on your iPhone or your laptop, your MacBook. So there's also the magnifier app, which uses your camera to zoom in on physical objects and reads labels. Really, really great in a like a setting for, say, you are a low vision user and you're maybe in a college lecture and there's slides up on the board. This will help zoom in for those for you. Also, there are some ways to adjust the interface of your system. So you can scale text size universally, change the contrast like we showed earlier with the accessibility reader, or apply specific color filters for different types of color blindness. Okay, so next, we're going to look at the tools built specifically for physical and mobility needs. So starting with assistive touch. Assistive touch is a feature that puts a floating button on your screen, and it is designed specifically for people who have a hard time pressing physical buttons, or swiping the screen or using certain hand gestures. So for instance, if you have trouble squeezing the side buttons to lock your phone or change the volume, there's this floating icon that you can tap instead, and it will open a small menu where you could perform those actions. That menu is also customizable. So, if you wanted to do things like take a screenshot or open the control center or, mimic other gestures, you can, set it up like that. That floating button will stay on your screen whenever it's enabled, but you can drag it to different parts of the screen. So if if you're in an app and the button is sort of in the way, you could move it out of the way. Apple also has an eye tracking feature for the iPhone that lets you navigate your device just using your eyes. This is very cool. It will use your phone's like front-facing camera, and it basically watches to see where you are looking at the screen. To set it up, you place the phone, maybe a steady distance, about a foot away from your face, and then it calibrates by having you look at a dot as it moves around the screen. And what this does is it teaches your phone how your eyes move. And once it's ready, an outline appears around whatever app or button you want to look at. And it sort of times it as it goes through things. To click on certain items, you could just stare at it for a few seconds. And this holding pattern is called dwelling, and it will trigger a tap, without having to, touch anything on your device. So it's a pretty cool feature. Similar to that, we also have switch control. So if you're not familiar, external switches or remotes are devices that, similar to what we are talking about with eye tracking, it will sort of navigate through all of the interactive things on your screen. And, a simple, pressing of that button, or depending on the type of switch, some can be, a sound you make with your mouth, a tube that you might breathe into. That will then select that item. And so that's another way to support mobility with the iPhone. I want to take a pulse check right now as we're going through these. Any questions about any of the topics that we've discussed so far? Just want to make sure I'm not losing anyone. Okay, not seeing anything in the chat, but that's okay. Like I said, we'll probably have some time towards the end for those of you that do have questions. Okay, so let's keep going and talk about features that are built for hearing, speech, and cognitive support. So the first one I want to talk about is audio transcription. Audio transcription is a huge help for anyone who is deaf or hard of hearing. It allows you to, follow along with conversations or voice messages or meetings without needing to rely on like hearing aids or a translator. So what this does is it converts spoken words into clean text that appears on your screen. Um, I work with deaf individuals, and my ASL is not very strong. Honestly, it's not good at all. I need to keep working on it, but we use audio transcription a lot of the times to communicate. Makes things a lot easier for us. It's also a really big win for people with, learning or focus differences. Specifically, if you're listening to someone who's a fast speaker and you might find that overwhelming, having a written script makes it a lot easier to process that information, at your own speed. You can also read the text while you're listening, or go back later and review, say, like a work meeting or a class that you attended. It also just takes away the stress of, trying to type or write notes that when someone is talking. So moving on, we talked about this a little bit earlier, sound detection. We were saying, I touched on this when we talked about name recognition, but sound detection uses your iPhone's microphone to just listen for specific noises in your home. Things like a knocking door, a crying baby, a barking dog, and you can, specify the things that you want it to listen for. And then it will, display that on your screen for you. The next feature here, which is pretty interesting, are the haptic feedback that is provided on iPhone. So, when we talk about haptics, we're talking about sort of the vibrations, the vibrating messages that you get. So, like when you get a text message, that's a certain haptic. When you get a phone call, it does, different haptic. And Apple has been experimenting with these haptic feedbacks and how your phone, sends specific signals to you based on vibrations. So they're now incorporating haptic feedback into Apple Music. And so what it will do for, the music that supports it is it will create distinct taps or textures and vibrations that will match the rhythm, the bass, and the energy of a song. And this is just, it opens things up to allow people to experience music, that may not have otherwise been able to experience it. I could see this, being useful in places like, if you are at a wedding and you want to participate and dance with a partner, or a nightclub, or, just have some fun. I think this is, a nice way to do that. So now we're going to talk about some speech and cognitive tools. And this first one here is something that's very interesting to me, and that's personal voice. So personal voice is a tool that was created specifically, for people who are at a risk of losing their ability to speak. So, for instance, those who are diagnosed with ALS or any other progressive conditions. What it allows you to do is, so it will protect your identity basically by recording your actual voice directly onto your phone before your speech changes. So say you have a diagnosis and you will lose the ability to speak at some point. You can record yourself saying certain phrases, certain words, and then it will use that in the personal AI to be able to basically mimic your speech on your phone once you have lost the ability to do that. So it is something that's pretty, when I first heard about this, I was, a little, nervous about this just from a, personal privacy perspective. But then when I think about, people who have gradually lost their ability to speak but still want to communicate with their loved ones, it's an important way to be able to share that with them. Um, so it's also, a way, for, some security, if you have any voice related, security things, to access, uh, various, firewalls, things like that. This is just another way to, to help with that. So moving on, we also, we do have a comment in the chat. Yes, I will be sending a recording out once we have it available, along with the slide deck for today's session. Thank you. Okay, so the next feature is assistive access. Assistive access is just another way to change your iPhone screen. So if you have, say, cognitive disabilities or memory loss, this makes it easier to sort of navigate your phone without getting overwhelmed. So it will strip away, complicated app menus, and replaces them with very simple layouts, large buttons, massive, like high contrast text, and uses images pretty heavily. So, this will help people sort of navigate through their phone. It's kind of like, the digital version of, I know some folks who will have simplified flip phones that, will maybe only call a few numbers. So instead of having, a full keypad, it will just have, certain people that it will call. This is a similar way to, update that for iPhones. And then lastly, on this page, we have guided access. And so guided access, similar to assistive access, helps folks, navigate who may struggle with focus or attention, or even, accidental touch control by locking, the iPhone with like one app. So when you turn it on, it prevents users from accidentally swiping out of the app or pressing side buttons or wandering to other phone settings. And you could use your finger to draw circles over specific areas on the screen. And it will turn off, touch sensitivity to those specific spots. So basically, it creates a safe digital environment for, like, say, people with autism or sensory differences, and allows them to, either, watch an educational video or play a game without, extra frustration of like losing, the content on the screen. And so the last feature I wanted to talk about today is not actually something within iOS itself, but is sort of integrated to the Apple App Store now. And that is these accessible nutrition labels, is what Apple is calling them. So now in the App Store, developers have the ability to provide an accessibility nutrition label for their products. So these labels, like, they will let you know clear and upfront what types of things they support. So in the past, people like, let's say if someone relies on a screen reader, uh, in order for them to be able to tell if something was accessible to screen readers, they'd have to download it and see for themselves or hear from a friend. Now, app programmers or app developers are self-reporting the features that they are, supporting. And this goes a long way in, like let's say there are very popular apps, but there are certain apps that are more accessible. Those more accessible apps might, be used by, a larger community of people with different disabilities, and make things a lot easier for them. My hope is that, this will drive app developers to build accessibility in from the ground up because they'll be able to get more users quickly if they feature the things that they have. Now, I will say that these nutrition labels, these are self-reporting from the app developers. But generally speaking, if someone is saying that they support these features, it usually means that they have taken the time to make sure that these actually work for their systems. So in terms of what's ahead, I'm going to say like right now, these are all the features that I wanted to talk about today within iOS. Now iOS, so that's for iOS 26. So iOS 27 is the next update that is coming from Apple, and it's scheduled for release this September. So just in a couple of months. So what I hope is that we're going to continue to see more accessibility updates. And as they do, we'll certainly keep updating this and provide future content for more webinars. So at this time, I want to open the floor up for some questions. So I do see we do have um, some questions in the chat. So let's see. I think Lisa asked this, so I don't think everyone can see this. So Lisa asks, "Hi Dan, I'm working with a young woman who needs her iPhone to communicate. She types in texts on a note app, but has exhibited very unsafe behaviors." Aha, got it. Tell you what, Lisa, why don't you, if you could send me an email, I'm going to put my email in the chat and we could discuss this. If you have further questions on that. Yeah, please send me an email. We could talk about that. Okay. Any other questions, or does anyone want me to go over anything? So Ashley says, does this update have alerted device features for someone hearing impaired? Yeah, so one of the things we talked about earlier, and let's see if I can go back to it. Where is it? So the new feature is that name recognition uh, feature. So it will alert you when someone is says your name, calls your name out, say in a noisy environment. But then also we have sound detection. So Ashley, if you turn sound detection on, it will alert for specific sounds that is, say like a car alarm or a doorbell ringing, things like that. There's also things like the audio transcriptions and closed captions that can help out as well. Any other questions involving any of the features that we talked about today, or if any features that we didn't discuss that you would like to see discussed in a future webinar? I'm going to take a moment and check the Q&A to see if there are any questions there. Okay, no questions in the Q&A. Okay, well, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. We didn't take up the whole hour, so I know, I don't think anyone minds when webinars go a little bit end a little bit early. So I want to thank you all for joining us today. Like I said, I will have the slide deck and the recording sent out to everyone who registered for today's webinar. And we will continue updating as we get more updates from Apple in the future. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording and ask any questions that folks have in the chat as they come along. So thanks again.